Hello, this is the Mae B Mindful Podcast, and I am your host, Hannah Mae. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. I'm so excited to be following up last week's episode where we really dove into a very pretty simple, basic, hopefully it was simple explanation of the mind, body, spirit component and aspect of the disease of addiction. And I wanted to this week really talk about that setup for success and that initial step in stepping from that old life into that new life that awaits you into your health and recovery journey. And, to help bring a little voice and awareness to some of the struggles that are so real that are going to come up here, and how to best set yourself up for success and create a container and some parameters for yourself and some encouragement and some hope, because this takes a tremendous amount of courage in waking up and becoming present to yourself, which if that's happening, you're needing to sever these attachments to these things that you've become very enmeshed with, that you defend, that you protect, that have become a solution for you, that most people largely misunderstand and judge because there is still a good amount of unawareness around this topic and subject, especially when you get into some of the other behavioral and process addictions. Alcoholism and drug addiction is pretty destigmatized, albeit there's still quite a bit of unawareness, judgment, and lack of understanding around it and how to properly treat it. People still really view it as like a moral issue, which people certainly act amorally under the influence. However, it's a largely driven condition. And so when we're bridging this gap, it can feel real shaky. It can feel real scary, really vulnerable. You're cutting off your supply, basically. You're cutting off that thing that you've been relying on, that drug, that substance, that behavior, those chemicals that you've been creating in your brain. And some of these addictions, by the way, if you want to talk about some of the process addictions, like sex and love, the whole compulsive overeating and the whole eating disorder spectrum, Al-Anonic stuff, codependency stuff, that's a conversation which I really like. Anything around money or financial unmanageability and where that can take people. There's a lot of shame around it. And when the person suffering doesn't understand it themselves and the people around them judge it and also don't understand it, then you can feel really alone in that. And this disease thrives on isolation. So it's so critical to, first of all, know that if you're suffering with it, somebody else is too. Other people are. And there is a whole network of people that are in fact recovered and on the other side of it, that are living free from that bondage of those attachments and addictions. And so it's super, super critical and important that you get hooked up with that community, with those people. And it is the antithesis of what most addicts want to do, because they're thriving and their illness is able to thrive quite well in this isolation. And they're not accountable to themselves or anybody, and there's no truth shining in. But when we come face to face with somebody who really sees us, really gets us, not only do we feel safe to move forward, do we feel held in that journey, which can feel very scary and unstable and shaky in the beginning, and at times throughout recovery, if stuff comes up for us, if challenges present, and also holding up a mirror for us and helping us to take an honest look at things and educating us on our condition and educating us on what best step to take next and how to step out of some of these old patterns, which is very counterintuitive. And we really, really, really need that support in order to do that effectively. I just want to preemptively say this. Some of the things that I'm going to say are going to sound extreme to the person that doesn't understand. They're going to be like, well, that's not moderate. That's very black and white, and that's very extreme, and that's very limiting. And that's fanatical. And there is a lot of judgment around this for people that don't have the experience of this. I've been on the receiving end of it myself. It can be very frustrating and disheartening, which is another reason why we really need our people and our community of people that do see us, that do understand where we can go, it's okay, we're not alone. Yes, there's going to be plenty of unawareness and ignorance around this condition and judgment even, because not only are you doing something that they just don't understand, but oftentimes if you're taking dramatic measures to support your health and recovery, you may be holding up a mirror for those people. And people don't like mirrors sometimes. If you're exhibiting a level of health and like actually doing something radical for yourself, some people don't like that. Like they actually can't tolerate and handle that. And I've witnessed that the criticism that I've received from people are usually from people that have areas of their life that they're, not to judge, but like pretty apparently unwell, like that well, addiction or compulsion, they're sweeping under the rug. That's an act of bravery and self-care that not everybody knows how to do for themselves. So that's just hopefully a helpful reframe. But back to what I was saying, this problem of addiction is a pretty extreme condition, wouldn't you say? So therefore, it calls for a pretty extreme and radical solution. It's not an issue of moderation. A moderation and control like whoop went out the window a long time ago. If you were able to do that, there'd be no issue. And most likely, if you're at a place or if you're witnessing somebody who's at a place where they're just hitting the wall and reaching that pinnacle of their pain to where it's precipitating some kind of new action to where they're like, okay, I need to change something here. It's because they've probably had many attempts to control it and manage it and get it under control prior to that, only to fail again and find things spinning out of control. Therefore, we're talking about an illness here of excess, where nothing is ever enough. That ruins people's lives in so many ways and hurts people around them. And so I'm just going to throw that out there. I lost a friend recently. Almost everybody that I was in treatment with 22 years ago is dead, clients and staff included. This is not uncommon. Some of these illnesses and manifestations of this illness are particularly insidious, and they really do a good job of convincing us that it's like normal, and society really wants to normalize some of this stuff as well. So like as an example, glorifying obesity, this body positivity that's actually really delusional and harmful. Obviously, we don't want it to swing the other way and body shame anybody either. That's not the point. Porn addiction is a perfect example. I've seen this ruin people's lives and lead to all kinds of dysfunction in people's personal lives and in their families. I mean, you can go ahead and like society can go ahead and try and normalize this, but this is a multi-gazillion-dollar industry that's targeting children, that's targeting like boys age 9, okay? That's pretty deceptive. That's pretty cunning in my opinion. And there's nothing good and healthy or wholesome or normal about that. And they know that in order to get these kids hooked and addicted, they want to get that dopamine on tap, like starting young, to get them addicted to their product that they're selling. So, it can get extremely out of control for people. Maybe not everybody. Some people can moderate. However, and I'm getting to my point here, putting down the substances that you find yourself attached to in order to step into a new life, like really creating and getting clear on a black and white abstinence, a bottom line, a top line. Like this stuff is so important in order to be able to move into the solution. In order to exit the nightmare, you need to fully wake up. And you're gonna stay asleep if you're hooked up, if you're on that drip still. And the reason why this is so painful, this waking up, is a lot of these addictions, I mean, all addictions, I think, are dopamine addictions. Some of them are really insidious because you're not even ingesting a substance in some cases. Your brain is creating its own chemicals that you're getting high off of. With fantasy addiction, for example, like in you go, you don't need nothing on the outside. That can also get somebody high and cause them to check out and disassociate from their life. And that over time is an incredibly painful way to live and can lead to a lot of unmanageability and dysfunction also. And so in cutting off this supply, because you've essentially been like hooked up to a fire hose, and so it's like washed away your baseline. And in order to come back and, come back to balance and restore ourselves, this is going to take a minute. And we're going to go through withdrawal. We're going to go through withdrawal no matter what it is, whether it's a substance, a behavior, a process addiction. And that's where we really need to be lifted up, to be supported, and we really need to do healthy, positive things for ourselves and create the containment that we need in order to not turn back and reach for that substance or that thing or that behavior again. This can feel pretty desperate if you're walking through withdrawal, and it's very easy to go back, much easier to go back than stay the path with this, because you desperately want out of those feelings. And these chemicals that our body produces are necessary in order for us to feel happy. So we need to find a way to bring restoration and healing to our bodies in this process and start to create some good, healthy habits and patterns in the meantime. Now, putting down the substance and getting entirely abstinent is not the thing that recovers, is not the thing that makes somebody well. That is simply getting abstinent. That is getting sober. That is getting dry. And that is really the beginning. And that's the state that we need to be in to become coherent and sober in order to do the deeper healing work, to get down to the deeper root causes and conditions in order to be able to live a life free, not being driven by our pain. And I mentioned this on the last episode. I am somebody that I am a huge fan of utilizing outside help and other healing modalities. It's something I've really dove into. It's what got me into hypnosis and some other approaches that have been incredibly helpful and effective in healing this deeper core wounding that if I don't heal, I'm going to continue to operate from. I don't want to operate from those things. If I'm operating out of my pain, I'm in a driven state largely, and I'm going to be making what I think are decisions, but I'm actually not making conscious decisions in that state. So in order to really get present and heal those things so that it does not have to drive us back to that behavior, since that behavior has really become something we identify with and it has become very enmeshed and has become a solution, then we need to really get present, because we can only really heal the things getting present. And when putting these things down, there's a tremendous amount of honesty required, because you really have to be very honest with yourself about what you're gonna be able to tolerate and what's gonna kick up that craving or keep you hooked in. And you really don't want to stay hooked up. It's kind of like if you go to the bar every day and you're sober and you just drink you just pass by, you just drink a thimbleful of alcohol every hour or so. You're probably not going to last long. It won't be long if you're that type of person. It's going to pull you back, right? So this is largely chemical. And a lot of people, doctors, people in healthcare, they talk about the dopamine. They talk about this from a chemical aspect in your brain. And it is, of course, because your body's producing those chemicals, and we need those chemicals in order to be happy. And we do need to find healthy ways of cultivating that and cultivating joy in our life. But there's also a big emotional piece, and that is that wounding that we need to get down to. And there's a really big spiritual piece, like I mentioned in last episode also, because that's the fear that comes in with this wounding that we come into agreement with. I did an episode on fear a few weeks back. You can go listen to that, where I break that down a little bit more. The majority of addicts have a decent amount of trauma, not all of them. It's not necessarily what defines or makes somebody an addict, but it is a pretty common thread. And considering that most people have some degree of trauma anyways, it's not abnormal to have to look at that stuff in those initial stages when the mind, before you have like real solution in place, the mind wants to convince you that you can do A, B, or C, and that should be okay, even though it's sort of stepping into dangerous territory. One good way of really examining and trying to suss out, like, is this actually sane? Like, is what I'm thinking a good idea? First of all, I heard early on in those early months, if you think you should do it, do the opposite. And I actually found that a very good rule to abide by, because what I found was my mind was just on lie repeat to me. It was just trying to pull me back because I wanted that relief so bad. And it really wasn't until I started taking this contrary action and taking care of myself that I started to get some relief. But I had to first acknowledge that that shit was a bad idea, even though I was pretty convinced it was like a good idea. A good hint is like that voice, if it sounds like a salesman, if it's trying to sell something to you, it's most likely trying to sell you the counterfeit. Like the real deal, the real solution, it doesn't need to be sold. It speaks for itself. It just is. It's sort of like the presence of God that just is there, that says, I love you, I'm here when you're ready. That people who say, hey, if you need anything, call me. There's an invitation, but it's not like, hey, it's not like sitting there working overtime, trying to convince you to do something, trying to convince you why it's such a good idea. And if at the thought of not doing that, you feel somewhat of a death, or if you feel like if somebody were to challenge you on it and say, hey, maybe that's not so healthy for you, maybe that's not a good idea, if you would want to protect that thing, if you would want to fight for that thing, that's a pretty clear signal that you're dealing with an illusion and an attachment that is most likely going to bring you back to that harmful behavior if you engage in that. And so we got to totally turn off the faucet here, this fire hose. Like we got to turn off the flow, detach from that source that you've been getting it from. Like I said, you do need to create these good feelings in your body. We're designed to want to be happy. We're supposed to be happy and get relief. We're not supposed to stay in a state of distress. In fact, we can't tolerate that for very long, or addicts in particular tend to default to that pseudo solution again. And so really, it's about hooking up to a new source, which I also discussed in the last episode around a spiritual solution and a psychic change. We just need to really just think about that and like switch sources. We got to create some new grooves with, and this is going to take a little time. It's going to take trust building. We do need support for this, but it's absolutely possible. You're needing to get yourself on a good, steady, solid drip of like sunshine, and I call it sunshine because that's real. That's not synthetic. Like that's real. That like fills you up, that gives you the vitamins and the nutrients that you need. It resets your body. And I'm really not about demonizing these substances or behaviors, because some people can do some of this stuff very moderately. I don't have a problem if people want to drink wine or whatever their alcoholic beverage of choice is. That's great. Enjoy it. I'm really happy for people if they can do that. I'm really happy when people can participate in certain things that I can't, and they can do it moderately and it doesn't seem to disrupt their lives. I'm like, wow, that's like really great for them. That's not me. That's just not me. I require a pretty high level of vigilance with this stuff and needing to watch myself, and I'm okay with that today because I have a solution. So this journey can feel very overwhelming in the beginning. It can feel like such a new way of life that you're having to step into and change everything and give things up that feel like death. These attachments, when you sever them, there's a mourning, there's a loss, and it can really truly feel like death. And moving through that detox and that withdrawal, if you've ever done it or you've ever witnessed someone do it, you know how intense it is. But there's a lot of information in it. There's a lot of opportunity in it for connection. And when it pushes us to get hooked up and connected with people and community, this is the thing and the antidote to this illness and the disease of addiction, because there's transparency in that. There's honesty. There's an exchange, there's support, there's uplift. It's not just connection with other people, but it's connection within ourselves and with the divine within. I have a friend who talks about like getting in a lifeboat, and to feel like you're lost at sea alone is a pretty scary thing. But when you get pulled up into that lifeboat and people are happy to see you and they hug you and they celebrate you, there's nothing like that. And then to be able to do that for somebody else and feel a part of in that way is incredibly uplifting and empowering. And it's like, it just sort of makes it all worth it. It makes life worth living. Not to mention, you really do, once you create these new grooves and patterns for yourself, and you get healed up over time, if you're willing to put the effort into that and get present for that. And it's like, life starts to open up. You can't have it both ways. And at the end of the day, you really have to ask yourself, when you're feeling like, if you're at that pivotal moment where you're like, I want this over here, but I don't know if I can part with this here, then the question to ask yourself is, what is this over here? Like, what is the prize? What is this life that I envision for myself, that I want, that I see other people living? What is it worth to me? What is it worth to give up to have that? And you can ask yourself that. And if you really genuinely ask yourself that, if you're really going to be honest with yourself, you'd be hard pressed to find someone that's like, no, it's not worth it. I'm going to hold on to this. Because that, like that solution, that pseudo solution, it actually sucks. It's terrible. It stops working. It just brings pain. But it's like, until you get a better solution, or you at least have the hope and that first taste of that more authentic, real, lasting solution, you can be very tempted to stay in that place and feel very defeated. So when we have these moments of clarity and this pain, or this painful event usually that precipitates this being willing to make this change and dive in and do something radical that you're like never thought you would have done before happens, it's really an incredible gift when it pushes and catapults somebody into desperation, to where the pain that is caused is greater than the fear of letting go of that attachment. Does that make sense? And that's a beautiful thing. That's a powerful moment. And that's not something that people, in my experience, really know how to create for themselves. That just has to come from, I don't know. I don't know what makes that happen, to be honest. It's sort of a riddle to me, because everybody's threshold is a little different with this. Some people are very high bottom, some people are very low bottom, and it just is what it is. And unfortunately, you can't like press a button and make someone want to get well. So for the person that's witnessing that person's suffering, it can be very challenging, but the only thing to really do for that person is to actually focus on their own well-being and recovery as well, which is, hey, that's why Al-Anon was created, FYI. And I just want to say this one more thing. If clients come to me and they want to do work and they want to get free of an addiction, and if after a few questions I determine that they would be better off in a 12-step program to start, I don't take them on as clients because I know better, and that's not something I want to wrestle with. So I send them to 12-step, unlike a lot of hypnotists. And by the way, just get themselves a pretty bad rap. I don't know if they know that, in 12-step, because it's not successful long term. If somebody wants to do that, have that transformation, and then dive into the deeper healing work, I'm here for it. That's what I utilize the work for, and it's been extremely helpful. And I love the deep healing work. I love parts work. I love inner child work. I love hypnosis for deepening my recovery, like getting me to those new levels and new awarenesses. It's so powerful. But I really just wanted to talk about this initial step, but the honesty required, the support needed, and this like pretty radical idea of needing to create and get very clear on detaching, like severing those attachments to those things that are keeping you sick, keeping you asleep, keeping you driven and unconscious. So with that, I will end this little chat. If anybody has any questions around this, you can always direct message me on Mae B Mindful on Instagram. Until next week, on the path with you. As always, bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com, or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at Mae B Mindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,